You mentioned you were sort of upset by the scientists not popularizing or putting their views out there. There was an excellent show you may have seen, others may have seen, on Charlie Rose, where James Watson and E.O. Wilson were the people talking. Both of them have put out new editions of Darwin's books with their comments. Mm-hmm. And E.O. Wilson didn't have much to say about this, but James Watson unabashedly comes out with the idea that he absolutely doesn't see God fitting in anywhere. Okay, he's an atheist, or he's, whatever his position is. And he said all his friends also, he could think of only one friend who could mix the two. And
I'm not sure that James Watson really has a large circle of friends.
All right.
Point taken, though.
Okay. Well, maybe the one friend who did believe is past is correct. But at any rate, the question I have here, though, is in the way this meeting started too, with a prayer, is somehow it's seen as not, to be a scientist, you're almost afraid in the United States, maybe not in England, to say that you're an atheist, and you seem to want to promote the idea that you're a Roman Catholic. I guess the question is, how do those two things jive, and how do they work with you and your mind?
Yeah, sure. I don't intend to promote the idea that I'm a Roman Catholic. I mention it. I am unaware of scientists in the United States who tell me that they are afraid to say that they are atheist or agnostic, because they say that all the time. There was a very interesting survey of the scientific profession and religious belief that was done by Ed Larson, and I forget who the other author was. But it was published, I believe, in Nature, or was it in Science? In Science or Nature, just a couple years ago. And one of the things they discovered, there was a similar survey surveying the scientific profession in the United States in 1917 or 1918. And what it showed is that in 1917 or 1918, about 40% of the scientific profession professed some sort of a belief in what could be construed to be a personal God. And that percentage was about the same today. So there is this consistency of belief in the scientific community. It's less than 50%. I don't think that's necessarily surprising. Scientists are skeptical. I tell my students that the first virtue of science is skepticism, so it's not surprising that scientists are skeptical about all sorts of things. But I do think that most people within the scientific community have come to accept the notion that one can be a genuinely religious person in the traditional Abrahamic sense and still be fully accepting of science as a way to learn about the natural world. And if James Watson would accept that, then I'd be very happy with him. He may see no place for God in his view of the world. I do. That means we differ on matters of philosophy and theology, but I don't think it necessarily means we differ on matters of science.
As this debate has continued, I particularly become more sensitive, as you know, in writing things with you, in fact, to the fact that science and religion can coexist. But at the same time, as often is pointed out to me when I talk on this subject, it's really a little bit disingenuous to argue that there is no tension. And in fact...
Oh, I wouldn't argue that for a second, yeah.
But I think scientists have to be more sensitive than we are. The fact that while a lot of this is, in fact, a lot of the reaction that you discussed is based on fear of science as the basis of the morality and everything, it's also based on a fear which is not completely displaced, that science is in fact a threat to religious belief. Because it is, in fact, as a well-known atheist physicist, Steve Weinberg, has said, science does not make it impossible to believe in God, it just makes it possible to not believe in God. And it really is science in some sense that without science everything's a miracle. And I think unless scientists are sensitized a little bit to the fact that science does present at some level to people a threat or perceived threat to their religious beliefs, then if we overlook that, then we tend to be blasé, and sometimes, in fact, counterproductive. An example, the best example I can think of is a debating John Calvert, who's head of the ID Network. He always brings up his letter from 40 Nobel laureates about evolution, which says there is no evidence for design. And, of course, that's that's not true. I mean, there's no evidence for design and purpose to the universe, and that's just not a scientific statement. And if scientists make those kind of statements, it naturally sort of encourages the fear of science. And so I think we have to be particularly sensitive that science is correct.
I will just second your comment. I think they're very wisely chosen.
If I may add one thing, we've been talking about the science, and that's quite appropriate, but I would maintain that until the theological presuppositions that underlie the attacks on evolution are addressed, and they need to be addressed by churches, by clergy, that this anti-evolution movement simply is not going to go away, and there will keep on being new avatars of intelligent design, creationism, or whatever it's called.
You talked about the dichotomy between, or the false dichotomy between religious belief and science. And presumably the fear of evolution is based on the belief that if you believe in evolution, then the Bible must be wrong.
That's one aspect, but there are others. There are other concerns as well. Okay.
So as you alluded to, perhaps part of the social and public issue here, a better understanding of the Bible and what it means. After all, there are two stories of creation in the book of Genesis, which is up front, which is perhaps as far as people get in reading the Bible. Do you think that modern reading, modern study, and scholarly interpretation of how the Bible evolved and how religious belief evolved is the other side of this equation?
I'm tempted to defer to Reverend Murphy on this, but I certainly would agree, although I would look back at the history of perhaps the past 500 years of Christendom, and I would suggest that perhaps expecting Christians to come to consensus about the meaning of the Bible is a hopeless quest.
Well, but I would agree that is and that's really one of the things that I was referring to earlier, that basically more theological literacy, critical reading of Scripture is a very important component of what I was talking about.